Greetings. My name is Maya Baumeister, and it is my pleasure to be presenting to you all a thematic analysis of exceptional experiences and taking a phenomenological look at the relationship between exceptional experience, interoception, and mindfulness. So, this presentation utilizes pilot data that was actually collected in 2017 through a survey conducted by Dr. Simmons Moore and Dr. Mitchell here at the University of West Georgia. And it involves 72 participants and is a mixed methods study, so involving both qualitative measures, which is what I'm presenting on here today, as well as 3 different quantitative measures, which I'll be talking a little bit more about in just a minute. And the objectives of this pilot study were, as you see in this lovely graphic, really looking at the interrelationship between these 3 variables, how exceptional experience, mindfulness, and interoception relate to one another or potentially don't, and really is an effort to extend and refine previous literature to better uncover these relationships. And the research questions for this pilot study are: how do the different facets of mindfulness relate to the different ways of experiencing exceptional experiences? And so throughout this presentation, I'll be using this denotation here, EXE, and that is a shorthanded way of saying exceptional experiences. So the second research question is inquiring into how does interoception relate to the different ways of experiencing exceptional experiences? And then finally, how do mindfulness and interoception correlate? Now, the context in which we're working here within the literature is really in a landscape where there's little research done on the correlates of these different ways of experiencing EXE. And so literature suggests that meditation and exceptional experiences are related. However, the role of mindfulness in exceptional experiences is actually underexplored. Research also suggests a relationship between certain types of meditation and interoception. And again, the exact relationship between mindfulness and interoception is in need of further clarification. And finally, there's no research exploring how interoception relates to exceptional experiences. And so this would be something very useful in addition to the literature. So interoception has been noted as an important variable in understanding the self and conscious experiencing, and so this may well be important in unusual experiences and consciousness, which are common in exceptional experience. So you might be wondering, what are exceptional experiences, right? So a very brief explanation here. Exceptional experiences relate to a set of experiences which are unusual, however not uncommon, within the population. So these include experiences that are often labeled as paranormal, and I'll go into a little more detail about some examples of exceptional experiences. So this page, our measure, is actually what we're using to collect our qualitative data as well as our quantitative data. And so it breaks down exceptional experiences into 4 subscales. So the first being exceptional phenomena in the environment. So these are experiences in your surroundings or your environment for which there appears to be no apparent cause or natural explanation. Next is internal perceptions, exceptional internal perceptions. And so these are internal experiences, phenomena that one experiences or observe exclusively by themselves. So this can come through the senses, so like hearing something. And then forms of knowledge, exceptional forms of knowledge. So this can be seen as meaningful chains of events, so synchronicities or hidden connections, right? Also extrasensory perceptions, including clairvoyance, precognition, and telepathy. And lastly here, exceptional physical experiences. So this involves the physical body, and this is seen in experiences of sleep paralysis or even out-of-body experiences. Now, I've also been throwing this word around, and you might be wondering, intero what? So interoception. And so this is actually a sense that provides information about the internal conditions of our body, how our body is feeling on the inside, so sensations and emotions. And this also includes like our awareness of our bodily processes and how that feels within our body. So to ground this into an experience that you might be familiar with, When we get hungry, our organs and our stomach begins to growl and gurgle. And so that sensation, awareness of that is you're perceiving it through your interoception. So as Craig puts it here, interoception also relates to how much the body is being listened to. So within the current psychosocial context, including emotional processing. And the way that we measured this in the study is through the MAIA, or Multidimensional Assessment of Interoceptive Awareness. So that's a mouthful, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but there are 8 subscales for this. And so when I'm saying subscales, so within the assessment, there are different questions that are scored differently based on these different subscales. And thirdly, mindfulness. And our mindfulness measure here is the FFMQ. So the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire, which has 5 subscales. And so when we talk about mindfulness in this context, we're talking about one's cultivation of an attitude or stance that is openly aware, as well as focally attentive in a non-judgmental way to one's inner and outer experience. So this leads me into the qualitative analysis, and this is where I come in, really looking at how do we derive meaningful understanding of these experiences in a qualitative way. And so at the end of the page R measure, which was the first measure that I discussed, which is our measure for exceptional experiences, we tagged this question at the end. If you answered yes to any of the questions in the preceding section, please describe that experience and please be as detailed as possible, essentially. And so what I'm doing is analyzing this written data through a phenomenological thematic analysis lens. And so the objective here and my real intentions for this exploration is to construct meaningful articulations for each category of exceptional experience, which then expresses some essential elements of that lived experience, of the exceptional experience. So remember, there are 4 different categories, and we'll go into them: the environment, the internal perceptions, phenomena, exceptional forms of knowing, and then lastly, the physical body. And so we chose phenomenology for this because it's really just studying the phenomena, something that is experienced by the human being. And this felt like a really effective way to look at these exceptional experiences. And so if you're not familiar with phenomenology, I'll explain very briefly what it is, because it's pretty simple, actually. So as Merleau-Ponty puts it, who is a real pioneer in phenomenology, explains it as the aim of phenomenology is the description of the phenomena. So describing, right? And it's a discipline that aims to focus on people's perceptions of the world in which they live and what it means to them. So really focusing on people's lived experience and their voices and their meaning making of their experiences. And so I'm taking a hermeneutic phenomenological lens here. And this perspective, again, focuses on the subjective experience of individuals and groups, and is an attempt to kind of unveil the world as it's experienced by the subject through their life stories. And so this is where our data comes in, written by the people who went through these experiences. So this opens the door for me explaining my process of interpretation and thematic formation here. So I started by reading the raw data, of course. I read it many, many times, really beginning my first couple of reads with an open mind, right? So seeing what sort of patterns might emerge on the surface of these experiences. And with my open mind, I also acknowledge that I'm coming with my own biases, and my reflexivity here, I'm acknowledging, is kind of coming from a transpersonal lens, right? Like looking at how these sort of transcendent, exceptional experiences fit into a framework of psychology and the human experience that is valid, and maybe in a way that behaviorist or positivistic psychology might not. And so I'm coming from it looking, humanistically, looking at the whole person and trying to really stay true to the words as spoken by the people and not doing too much of my own analysis of the data, trying to really let the data speak to me. And so during that process, I began to highlight meaningful phrases. And so these different meaningful phrases, I then extracted different meaning units. So maybe they were whole phrases, maybe they were just words that really were popping up multiple times, or felt like they were conveying some sensorially evocative information about that lived experience. Next, I began to cluster and kind of group those meaning units with similar content. And so these different clusters are where themes began to emerge. And so I would kind of label these different groups. And from there, I began to develop an articulated theme, using key phrases from the raw data to illustrate an image of what each of these different exceptional experiences might be like. So the last bit on my process here is this table that's really aiming to illustrate what my process was like. So starting on the left column here with the raw data, you'll see there's a quote, a direct quote from the written data that was collected at the end of the page R survey. And so from there, I took these meaning units, so these different phrases and words, that I then plugged back in to the farthest right column with our theme. And so this theme here didn't all come from this one quote, right? This is a conglomeration of multiple quotes and multiple pieces of data that were woven together. So that leads us to the emerging themes that I have articulated per our 4 page R categories. Now, for the sake of time, I have starred one theme for each of the 4 categories that I'll go into a little more depth on, but you'll see there's a series of themes that have emerged in the process of this thematic analysis. Starting with exceptional experiences in the environment. Now, the theme of somatic reactions. The experience of exceptional phenomena in the environment is an experience of physiological arousal, such as the heart racing and a sense of unnatural panic. One may experience feelings of fear, intimidation, being terrified, spooked, or scared. And so those included some of the keywords from the data to illustrate. These effects may continue after the initial event, including arm hair standing up, while talking about the event that they vividly remember. So the next 3 themes in this category I'm going to kind of glaze over, again for the sake of time, but calling in the idea of a witnessing of material malfunctions as being a common theme in exceptional experiences in the environment. Attribution of intentionality, so attributing these phenomena to some sort of intelligence or intentional force. And lastly, for exceptional experiences in the environment, this experience of evasive sensorial stimulation. So maybe hearing a sound that when you go to investigate, it's as if the sound moves to evade the experiencer from discovering its source. Next, exceptional internal perceptions. So shifts in conscious awareness. The experience of exceptional internal perceptions are characterized by experiences beyond this plane of reality. Such experiences may involve a shift in consciousness, which may be achieved voluntarily through conscious choice, such as in lucid dreaming or meditation, or initiated spontaneously by unknown factors. One is more likely to experience exceptional internal perception while in the twilight of sleep, right before falling asleep, soon after awakening, or while in a sleeping state. Next, felt sense of safety and danger. So determining whether they can trust a phenomena or an energy that they're sensing, or if it's something like a malevolent presence that stimulates a sense of danger or fear. Healer's intuition. So we were very lucky to have a handful of healers who were gracious enough to share their experiences with us. And so this theme was kind of constructed based on those written data. Next, for exceptional forms of knowledge, knowing as sensory information. So the experience of exceptional forms of knowledge is an experience of receiving knowledge through sensory information from which one derives meaning. So one might see or hear deceased people, sometimes with their ears, or internally receive messages in their mind's eye or mind's heart. And now with this one, I wanted to point out that there are some experiences that transcend any of these categories. Maybe there are multiple of these themes that are alive in any given experience. And so this one, for example, could perhaps even relate to internal perceptions in addition to forms of knowledge. Knowing as a call to action, so feeling compelled to do something, go a certain way, doing something that they might not otherwise do without really being able to rationalize or really think about why before. Knowing as remembering, so this vague sense of familiarity that comes in certain places, certain memories that might emerge from which no one has not experienced directly in this lifetime. Knowing as communication, so receiving messages from an unknown source that they feel as communicating with them. And this goes hand in hand with interpretation of source. So in some cases, people described being able to identify the source of where this knowledge was coming from, be it God, a higher power, or a deceased loved one who was looking out for them. Alternatively, someone might acknowledge that there was no source of this information and somehow I just knew. Lastly, for our exceptional forms of knowledge, knowing as dreaming of future events. So these are our precognitive dreams, in which one dreams of things that later come true, or when they wake, they come to find that the things that they dreamt about were actually happening at the time of the dream and while they were asleep. And finally, our exceptional physical experiences. So being touched by an invisible presence. Exceptional physical experience is an experience of feeling touch of an invisible presence or disembodied entity. Physical touch may be experienced in the form of feeling strangled, suffocated, grabbed, dragged, or sat upon by an invisible force. Sometimes the experience is gentle and subtle. The experience is likely to occur while one is alone, at night, while falling asleep, or shortly after waking. Immobilization of the body, such as we see in sleep paralysis, was expressed. Separation from the body, so this is seen in our out-of-body experiences in which one feels as if their consciousness is leaving the body, and either they're able to perceive their body or they have a sense that they're levitating above their body, and then it's also characterized by a sense of falling back into the body. Now, the implications of this research and why should anyone care? We just heard about different experiences and different themes within these exceptional experiences, which are experienced by people in the population, and they're really not that uncommon. And so I see value in validating and normalizing these experiences so that they don't potentially turn into trauma, and so that they're also more deeply explored and studied, and so that we can really start to uncover the meanings and understand these experiences a little bit better. Also, I believe there's value in bringing our attention to other forms of knowing and being able to listen to our bodies and sensorial information that we receive at the bodily level, and different sorts of intuition and different ways of knowing that are actually relevant perhaps to any given experience, and cultivating that sense and cultivating a relationship with our other ways of knowing that is beyond our rational mind, which can be utilized in our day-to-day life. This research also potentially connects dots and fills holes within the literature to demonstrate a link between data within these phenomena for a more well-rounded picture on what these experiences are all about. And finally, it's interesting. Okay. To me, I just get this sense of curiosity and this desire to understand and to know, and something in that process of discovery is also deeply valuable. Now, further directions that we can take this study. So we collected our qualitative data through our MAIA, our FFMQ, and through our page R. And so we're doing correlates to look at the statistical relationships between that quantitative data. Also, looking at boundary thinness and how that relates to exceptional experience and interoception might be an interesting way to move forward. Also, there seems to be a relationship between the state of consciousness, such as sleeping or meditation, during which these experiences are more likely or more common. So perhaps there's something in that liminality that warrants further investigation. And as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple experiences that have multiple categories and multiple themes that are present in them. And so looking deeper into these experiences beyond the four categories. And lastly, as is seen in the material malfunctions, a lot of the time it was expressed that these material malfunctions would happen in relation to some sort of electrical light or their car alarm, for example. And so what is this relationship between these experiences and electricity potentially? You know, as our human bodies and our brains are electrical, I am just curious about what relationships might be there. And to conclude, I would really love to give some acknowledgments to Dr. Simmons-Moore and Dr. Mitchell for collecting this data and initiating this project and involving me in the phenomenological interpretation of this data, and for their mentorship throughout this process. Thank you so much. Isabel Tweedy, she is a doctoral student in the psychology department here, and she's been a really supportive sounding board for me in articulating these themes and coming up with succinct titles, as well as supporting me in some of the conceptual framework and forwarding me some phenomenological literature. Acknowledging the UWG Graduate School for funding that enables me to do this research, and finally a shout out to the Exceptional Experiences Research Lab. So thank you all for holding space for me to practice this presentation and for all the helpful feedback that really supported me in giving this presentation today. So thank you all. Here are my references, and that concludes my time for this presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions, your comments, and continuing dialogue with this research.